The studio lights burned brighter than ever as the cameras cut to the stage. The country was staring down the barrel of another government shutdown, and nerves across America were already stretched thin. Into this storm walked Denzel Washington, calm, commanding, and visibly outraged at what he called political games played with people's lives. Across from him sat JD Vance, sharp suit, sharp tongue, and already on edge. The two figures, seated at a round table surrounded by a hushed studio audience, represented more than just personalities, they embodied two visions of America colliding in real time. Denzel wasted no time. "While politicians like you trade blame," he began, voice steady but cutting, "families are staring at empty paychecks, small businesses are suffocating, and the very people who keep this country running, the workers, the soldiers, the teachers, are paying the price." His words landed like punches, and the silence in the studio made every syllable sharper. Vance leaned forward, smirking as if preparing to counterpunch. "Denzel, with all due respect, you're an actor. You deliver scripts. In the real world, tough choices have to be made. A shutdown is sometimes the only way to stop reckless spending." He thought his jab might put Denzel off balance, but it only sparked fire. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing history in the making. Denzel's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare dismiss this as a performance," he shot back. "This isn't Hollywood. This is about real Americans living paycheck to paycheck while politicians like you gamble with their futures." The tension in the air could be cut with a knife. The tension in the studio was like static electricity, building with every word. JD Vance leaned back in his chair, the smirk fading but his tone sharpening. "You speak of workers, Denzel, but what about the long-term survival of this nation? We can't keep borrowing, spending, and pretending the bills won't come due. Sometimes you've got to shut things down to fix the system." The words echoed across the studio, but instead of applause, there was a wave of murmurs from the audience, skepticism, frustration, disbelief. Denzel leaned in now, his voice dropping lower, his intensity climbing. "Fix the system," he repeated. "You don't fix a broken car by slamming it into a wall. You don't heal a patient by starving them. And you don't fix a democracy by pulling the plug on its workers and calling it discipline. That's not leadership, JD. That's cowardice." The crowd erupted, half in applause, half in gasps. Vance raised his hand, trying to regain the floor. "It's easy for you to preach, Denzel, but you don't have to balance a budget. You don't answer to voters who demand accountability. My job is to ensure America doesn't drown in debt." But Denzel was relentless, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "And what about the soldier overseas waiting for his paycheck to feed his family? What about the nurse pulling double shifts while wondering if she can cover rent? What about the single mother working 2 jobs, only to see her government slam the doors on her future?" The camera zoomed in on his face, calm yet burning with conviction. This shutdown politics isn't about accountability, it's about power. And the people paying the price are the ones with the least of it. The moderator tried to cut in, but the fire on stage was unstoppable. The clash wasn't just about economics anymore, it was about the very soul of governance. The air thickened in the studio. The audience wasn't just watching, they were holding their breath. JD Vance clenched his jaw, his voice sharpening like steel. "You make it sound simple, Denzel, but you don't sit in the Senate chamber, facing trillion-dollar deficits. You don't have to explain to Americans why their grandchildren will inherit mountains of debt because politicians before them refuse to act responsibly." Denzel leaned back for a moment, his eyes narrowing, the calm before another storm. Then he spoke, each word heavy with precision. "You're right, JD, I don't sit in that chamber. But you know what I do? I listen. I see the people you claim to serve. And what they're telling you, loud and clear, is that they don't want to be pawns in your power games. They want stability, they want hope, they want to trust their leaders." The audience erupted in applause, but Denzel wasn't finished. His voice rose, sharper now, cutting straight into the political rhetoric. "Debt is real, yes. But so is hunger. So is eviction. So is despair when a paycheck vanishes because politicians can't compromise. You say you're fighting for the future, JD, but you're crushing the present. And the present is where real people live. The camera cut to Vance, visibly agitated, gripping the arm of his chair. That's emotional spin, he shot back. Real leadership means making tough choices. It means not giving in to every demand just because it tugs at your heartstrings. If we don't draw the line now, when will we? When America collapses under its own weight? But Denzel was ready, his voice booming as if speaking not just to Vance, but to the nation. America doesn't collapse under compassion. It collapses under arrogance, under leaders who mistake cruelty for strength. Shutting down the government doesn't make us disciplined, it makes us broken. And the world is watching. The crowd stood to its feet, clapping, shouting, the tension boiling over into raw energy. The moderator's voice was drowned out. What began as a debate had transformed into a defining moment. The debate stage had become more than a studio, it was a battlefield of ideals. The moderator struggled to regain control, but the moment belonged to the clash between conviction and calculation. JD Vance leaned forward, his finger pointed sharply toward Denzel, his voice carrying the tone of a man cornered but unwilling to yield. You talk about compassion, Denzel, but compassion without discipline is chaos. We can't just spend endlessly, throwing money at every problem. Do you want America to be strong, or do you want America to be soft? Because you can't have both. Denzel tilted his head slightly, almost as if studying Vance under a microscope. His reply came not as an outburst but as a slow, deliberate strike. Strength isn't about punishing the weak, JD. Strength is when the most powerful nation in the world makes sure a child doesn't go hungry, that a veteran isn't left on the street, that families aren't living in fear because a shutdown turned their lives upside down. That's real strength. The audience roared, but Denzel raised his hand for silence, his eyes never leaving Vance. You say discipline? Fine. Then discipline the lobbyists, discipline the billionaires who get tax cuts while working families get scraps. Don't you dare call it discipline when it's just cruelty dressed up in politics. For a moment, Vance faltered. The camera caught the flicker of unease in his eyes, but he recovered quickly, snapping back with sharpness. That's Hollywood idealism talking. You're great at delivering lines, but the real world doesn't work like your movies. In the real world, sacrifices must be made. Leaders must be willing to say no. Denzel leaned forward now, his voice dropping into a calm, steady tone that carried more power than shouting ever could. Sacrifice is real, JD. But funny how it's never you, never the ones in power, who make it. It's always the teachers, the factory workers, the nurses, the soldiers, the backbone of this country. They pay the price, while politicians argue on TV and call it leadership. That's not sacrifice, JD. That's betrayal. The audience gasped, and the silence that followed was heavier than any applause. The line cut like a blade, echoing across the room, into the living rooms of millions watching live. The silence after Denzel's last words was electric, heavy, sharp, almost suffocating. JD Vance shifted in his chair, trying to steady his composure, but the crowd had already sensed the tremor. The camera zoomed in, catching the sweat forming on his brow as millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens. Finally, Vance snapped back, his voice rising with defiance. You call it betrayal, Denzel, but I call it responsibility. Someone has to protect this country from drowning in debt. Someone has to make the hard choices. You think money grows on trees? You think America can just keep spending like a spoiled child? That's the real betrayal, lying to people, telling them everything is free, when in reality, the bill always comes due. The words echoed with force, but Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned back, almost relaxed, his gaze cutting through the tension like a knife. His tone was measured, calm, but carried the weight of undeniable truth. The bill always comes due, JD, you're right. But let me ask you. Why is it always the single mom working 2 jobs who pays it? Why is it always the small-town factory worker who loses his job first? Why is it never the billionaire with loopholes, never the corporation that hides its money offshore, never the politician with his pockets full? Don't talk to me about responsibility when the system you defend was built to crush the very people you claim to serve. A murmur rippled through the audience, half applause, half shock. Vance's jaw tightened, his face flushed with the sting of the accusation. He tried to speak, but Denzel raised his hand, seizing the moment with precision. You stand here preaching about debt and discipline while entire families are lining up at food banks because paychecks stopped. You want to talk sacrifice? Then sacrifice your donors, JD. Sacrifice the billion-dollar tax breaks, sacrifice the luxury of corruption. Until then, don't look America's working people in the eye and tell them they need to tighten their belts while you loosen yours. The crowd erupted, this time louder, more divided, half cheering, half booing. The studio had become a storm, and in the middle of it, Denzel sat unshaken, his words landing like thunderbolts. The moderator tried to regain control, his voice trembling as he raised his hand for silence. But the storm had already taken over the room. JD Vance, flushed and furious, slammed his palm on the desk. This is politics, Denzel. It's not a fairy tale. You don't fix trillion-dollar problems with speeches and emotions. You fix it with hard cuts, with real sacrifice, with discipline. That's leadership. Denzel leaned forward, his voice low but cutting, each word deliberate, like a hammer striking iron. Leadership? You call this leadership, forcing millions of Americans to live without paychecks, shuttering services, punishing children and seniors? That's not leadership, JD. That's hostage-taking. You don't hold the government, and the people who depend on it, for ransom just to score political points. You're not balancing a checkbook. You're gambling with human lives. The audience gasped at the sharpness of the rebuke. Vance's eyes narrowed, his composure slipping into something closer to desperation. He pointed across the stage, jabbing his finger in Denzel's direction. And what's your plan, huh? Just keep printing money until inflation crushes every savings account in America? Until the dollar means nothing? You think compassion feeds families when the economy collapses? Compassion doesn't pay bills. Denzel let the silence stretch for a moment before replying, his voice calm but carrying the weight of righteous fury. Compassion is exactly what pays bills when greed has taken everything else. You talk about numbers, but numbers don't bleed. People do. And if you can't understand that, if you can't put humanity before your politics, then you don't belong in leadership. You belong in a ledger. The crowd exploded again, applause thundering from one side, boos roaring from the other. The clash had transcended politics, it was now a battle for the soul of the nation, the debate hall had turned into a battleground. Reporters in the front row typed furiously, capturing every word, while the camera zoomed in on the 2 men locked in ideological combat. JD Vance, his voice rising to a near shout, threw his hands into the air. You think you're righteous, Denzel, but you're reckless. You want to keep the machine running no matter the cost. But the truth is, America is broke. And sometimes, to save the house, you have to shut the lights off before it burns down completely. The metaphor hit the air like a spark, but Denzel immediately countered, his delivery steady, his eyes burning with controlled anger. No, JD. That's not saving the house, that's setting it on fire yourself and calling it strategy. Real courage isn't in shutting things down, it's in finding solutions that don't punish the innocent. Real courage means standing up to corporate greed, to wasteful spending, to corruption, not tearing down the roof over every hard-working family's head. A few gasps rippled through the audience as Denzel leaned forward, his voice dripping with conviction. Let me tell you something, the single mom waiting for her paycheck to buy groceries doesn't care about your metaphors. The veteran relying on government services doesn't care about your slogans. What they care about is surviving. And survival doesn't wait for politics. Survival demands action. Right now. The crowd erupted, many rising to their feet, clapping and shouting in agreement. JD Vance, visibly rattled, adjusted his microphone, his jaw tight. He shot back, "You can dress it up however you want, Denzel, but reality doesn't bend to feelings. When the money runs out, it runs out. You can't legislate compassion into a budget that's bankrupt." Denzel's reply was instant, his words sharp as a blade, "No, JD, you can't legislate greed either. But somehow, your politics always finds a way to protect it." The air froze for a moment, the audience holding its collective breath. The confrontation had just reached a point of no return, the moderator's voice cracked as he tried to regain control, but the moment was already spiraling. Denzel leaned back in his chair, his hands folded, as if daring JD Vance to take another swing. The camera zoomed in on Vance's face, his jaw twitching, his eyes flashing with frustration. "You talk about greed like it's some monster out there in the shadows," Vance shot back, his tone sharp, almost mocking. "But you forget, Hollywood made you rich, Denzel. You cashed the checks, you live in the mansion, and now you want to lecture the rest of us about struggling families? Spare me." The crowd buzzed, half in shock, half in anticipation. Denzel didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, his voice rising, not with rage, but with a moral clarity that cut through the noise like thunder. "Yes, JD. I have been blessed. I won't deny that. But here's the difference, you take your platform and use it to justify hurting people. I take mine to call it out. Money isn't the problem. Morality is. And every time you defend shutting this government down, you prove that power matters more to you than people." The audience roared again, but Denzel raised a hand, quieting them. His voice dropped, lower now, but each word landed like a hammer. "America isn't broke, JD. It's broken by policies that serve the few and crush the many. And you're standing here telling millions of workers their pain is just collateral damage in your war of ideas. That's not leadership. That's cowardice in a suit." The silence that followed was deafening, the crowd almost unsure if applause or outrage was appropriate. Then, like a wave, the cheers began, drowning out the stage. JD Vance shook his head, gripping his mic tighter, his knuckles white. "This isn't a movie, Denzel," Vance snarled finally. "You don't get to play hero here." Denzel didn't miss a beat. "No," he said, his gaze locked on Vance. "But you don't get to play villain with people's lives either." The hall erupted once more. The tension wasn't just thick, it was electric, a live wire sparking in front of millions. The studio lights felt hotter now, the tension in the room pushing the atmosphere to the breaking point. Every breath, every glance between Denzel and JD Vance was being devoured by millions watching live. The moderator tried again to step in, but his voice was lost beneath the storm. This was no longer a debate, it was a duel. JD Vance slammed his hand on the podium, his voice booming with anger. "You think you've got the moral high ground, Denzel? Let me tell you something, you're just another elite who doesn't understand what it's like to fight for survival in the heartland. My people are tired of being lectured by actors who fly private jets while they can't even afford groceries." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some jeering. The energy in the room was split like a lightning bolt down the middle. Denzel leaned forward, his eyes locked on Vance, his voice cutting through the chaos with piercing precision. "Your people? JD, every time you say, your people, what you mean is your donors, your lobbyists, your backroom deals. Don't talk to me about the heartland when your policies strangle it. Don't tell me about working families when you're ready to throw them into darkness for the sake of a headline. This shutdown isn't about survival, it's about you chasing power, no matter the cost." The words landed like thunder, the audience gasping, then roaring. Vance clenched his jaw, visibly shaken, but he refused to back down. I fight for the forgotten men and women in this country, not for Hollywood applause, he barked. And then Denzel, with the calm ferocity of a storm about to break, delivered the blow. If you truly fought for them, JD, you wouldn't be willing to starve them to prove a point. That's not fighting for America, that's fighting against it. The arena shook with noise, applause, shouts, and gasps blending into one uncontainable eruption. Vance's face flushed, his fists tightening as if every ounce of restraint was slipping away. The debate had crossed into uncharted territory. This wasn't about winning points anymore, it was about survival, about truth versus spin, about power versus principle. The camera zoomed in on Denzel's face, unyielding, resolute, as if he were staring not at one man, but at a system he refused to let crush the people he claimed to speak for. The debate stage had transformed into an arena of raw conviction. The moderator's attempts to regain order had long been abandoned. This was no longer his show. It was a clash between two visions of America, one built on accountability, the other on political survival. JD Vance's face was tight with rage, his voice trembling as he lashed out. You can sit there and preach, but the truth is, America is collapsing because of weak leadership and because people like you glamorize failure. You don't know what it's like to sacrifice, you don't know what it's like to fight for real Americans. The audience howled, some rising to their feet, torn between cheers and boos. Denzel's response came with chilling clarity. He leaned forward, his words slicing through the storm like a blade. No, JD. What I know is that when government shuts down, it's the nurses, the teachers, the veterans, the very people you claim to defend, who suffer first. You weaponize their pain and call it patriotism. But the truth is, this isn't sacrifice, it's sabotage. The silence that followed was electric. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, lingering on Denzel's unshakable stare. Vance tried to rally, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. I'm standing up for them, he barked, pounding his chest. But the words sounded hollow, like an echo in a collapsing chamber. And then Denzel delivered the final strike, his voice resonant, deliberate, unforgettable. Standing up for them? JD, when you push this shutdown, when you gamble with livelihoods, you're not standing up, you're tearing down. America doesn't need another politician playing games with power. It needs leaders who understand that the people aren't pawns, they're the very foundation of this nation. And you've forgotten that truth. The crowd erupted into chaos, applause and outrage colliding in a wave of unstoppable energy. Some stood to cheer, others shouted in protest, but no one could deny what had just happened. Denzel had turned the stage into a courtroom, and JD Vance had been left on trial before the nation. As the camera zoomed out, the image burned itself into the collective memory, two men on opposite sides of the stage, one furious and defensive, the other resolute and immovable. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a defining battle, a viral moment that would echo across headlines and social feeds by morning. The story wasn't over. But the message was clear. The fight for America's future wasn't about who shouted the loudest, it was about who spoke the truth when the nation needed it most. Tonight, you didn't just watch a debate, you witnessed a truth being spoken when it mattered most. Government shutdowns, reckless politics, and economic games are not abstract ideas, they touch real lives, families, and futures. What you saw was not just two men clashing, it was the clash of visions, one that treats power as a weapon, and one that sees the people as the very foundation of this nation. Remember this moment, because history is shaped not by silence, but by those who dare to speak when the stakes are highest.